Operation Southern Star =RK Part 3. Flag Bridge. Republic Cruiser Lights Solace. Camino. General Rancisis, the enemy is entering the system in strength. Our remaining fleets in the sector are making their best speed here. A clone reported. He was Gal, the admiral who used to be in charge of the defense in space before the Jedi Master arrived. Any trace of Vale's fleet? We can use any help we can get, Rancisis asked. His tail coiled around his custom seat and gripped at indignation at what he was forced to do for the good of the galaxy. No, General. As far as we know, he should be somewhere in the Western Quadrant, Cal answered. Rancisis simply nodded, lost in thoughts. While the Jedi Master agreed that the Sith needed to be removed from power, all these lies, deceptions, they weren't the Jedi way. What he found most disturbing was how easy lying turned out to be. It was too easy. It didn't feel like pushing him towards the dark side, and that more than anything scared Rancisis. Because in the end, even if everything went as planned or even better, the Sith might have won. Not because they would succeed into eradicating the Jedi, but because they made them to destroy themselves from writhing. To fall without noticing it. Rancisis frowned. That wasn't a new thought. He had those doubts for months now, however he simply couldn't see a better alternative. What should he do? Betray everything he believed in so he could run and save his own skin while abandoning the galaxy to the Sith? Doing so was simply unacceptable. Another person might have considered running away without doing their best to halt the Sith. That was simply unthinkable for the Jedi, which left them with less than ideal options. Launch fighters and keep them under Guardian coverage at all times. I want all ships constantly executing random evasive maneuvers to minimize the chance of ramming attacks, the Jedi Master ordered. A single command zoomed out the image in the holotank in the center of the tactical table around which Rancisis and his staff were sitting. The hundreds of Republic ships and thousands of fighters became green symbols as the scale increased. Finally the enemy leading elements became visible. They were coming in cautiously. The closest munificent divisions were entering real space 4 light hours from Camino. First were scouts, which immediately launched vultures to extend their effective sensor coverage. Soon the separatist numbers began increasing exponentially until Camino was surrounded by a red tide. It wasn't long before jamming and General ECM made scanning the enemy unreliable. General, I'm glad you got here when you did, Cal said. The enemy numbers are about 60% higher than Oni's estimates. Rancisis hissed in annoyance. Was this a mistake, a deliberate deception, or simply the enemy being the enemy in conjunction with the system defenses we should be able to hold? The Jedi Master said with confidence he really didn't feel. They probably can call more reinforcements. We aren't so lucky, Cal pointed out. Then we'll have to fight harder. Rancisis shrugged. It was true, what he said. It was another deception too. One of the last communiques from Coruscant contained a coded message for his eyes only using a one-time ancient Jedi cipher. Practically unbreakable if you didn't know the key, which he was given before leaving the temple. The message was short and to the point. The Council had proof that the clone army was a Sith invention and would in all likelihood back up the Sith when this whole charade was over. There were no instructions sent. Just that bit of information. Rancisis closed his eyes. What was he supposed to do? Wasn't it enough that he had to lie to and deceive everyone under his command? No, there were no instructions. Nor suggestions. He was left on his own devices, so he could follow his conscience. The Jedi Master almost laughed bitterly at that. The Sith had all but won unless something radically changed. They had the ear of the Senate, their popularity was soaring while the Jedi were hated and mistrusted by the ordinary people. Now he learned that the bulk of the Republic army was actually a Sith one simply waiting for an order to turn upon the nation they were supposed to protect and transform it into an empire. Rancisis hissed quietly. Camino was the primary source of the clones. There were a few new smaller facilities, though in the great scheme of things they were of no consequences. Besides, all of them were cut off behind enemy lines anyway. If Camino fell, the Sith would lose one of their greatest weapons. Without a source to replenish their numbers, by the end of the war the clone army would be a shadow of its former self at best. The only question was, could Rancisis do it? Could he betray all the men under his command in such a way? Could he dare not do it? Could he risk leaving an intact clone army in the hands of the Sith if the Jedi at Coruscant failed? The Force was quiet. The light side didn't guide him. The dark side didn't attempt to sway him. Rancisis found himself alone with his thoughts, and for the first time since he could remember, the Jedi Master found himself despising the Force. What was one more deception, one more betrayal, when it was to protect the whole galaxy? "We're going with Blue One," Rancisis finally ordered. "May the Force be with us all." The Separatists swarmed forward and the battle was finally joined. =RK=, Bridge. Droid Command Ship Death at Dawn. Camino. Ever since he got his updates, TK-51 had experienced many new emotions. The sheer frustration he was feeling after a week of slamming into the Republic forces defending Camino and bouncing back was a new and most certainly not welcomed emotion. Losses on both sides had been steadily mounting. Camino had acquired 2 brand new orbital rings made exclusively by destroyed ships and shattered battle stations. While the enemy was slowly, surely losing, the price was proving almost too heavy. While the Confederacy could afford to spend incredible amounts of resources in order to neutralize this planet once and for all, TK-51 couldn't help it but notice that only droids were thrown in the first 4 assault waves. They did their jobs, shattered the enemy's outer defensive rings, and all but a lucky few were destroyed in the process. For the first time since being built, he found that fact worthy of resentment. TK-51 paused at that revelation and activated his self-diagnostic subroutines before concentrating on the task at hand. He was part of the 6th assault wave, and this one was going to break through to the planet. In fact, TK-51's role was a vital one. All the ships he had captured in previous engagements were repaired and chock-full with advanced droids and the Confederacy's new allies. He was to simulate a running engagement while those ships attempted to seek safety with their friends protecting Camino. Once in positions, they were going to disgorge all the ground forces they had and ram the closest juicy target. That little deception was going to happen while the 5th assault wave was busy throwing itself against the last defense line and all remaining enemy ships, which were still too many for comfort. It was a good plan. A few Republic battle groups evading Sith forces in the sector were able to reach Camino in the last few days. 2 actually fought their way to the planet, losing most of their numbers in the process. One such incursion was the primary reason why the 4th assault wave got gutted instead of achieving its mission with acceptable losses. There was just a single problem: TK-51 had qualms about the Confederacy's new allies. Jedi of all things. That they were supposedly from the Old Republic, well, that bit of data didn't make him feel any better. Still, TK-51 was a Confederate tactical droid with a mission, and he was going to do it to the best of his abilities. An alarm sounded. The plot updates showing 10 Republic cruisers exiting hyperspace in a zone reasonably far away from Sith forces. TK-51 began issuing orders, including a calculation of hyperspace insertion coordinates in front of the new enemy. Letting them plausibly get away was going to be tricky. =RK=, Part 4. =RK=, CIC, Republic Cruiser Daring. High orbit over Camino. Wilhuff Tarkin was a man running out of what little patience he had left. His homeworld had been under siege for weeks now, with no word of what was happening there. His brother was there holding the line, and he had no idea if Gideon was still alive. If the rest of his family was safe. If that wasn't enough, someone in Republic intelligence had cribbed up by the numbers. There was supposed to be a single reinforced separatist fleet assaulting Camino. They could have stopped such a force. Instead they came knocking with thrice the expected numbers. That was bad. However, the combined Republic fleet and fortifications should have been enough to hold off the enemy for a long time. A month, perhaps more, unless they got heavy reinforcements and could afford to waste ships, or the Jedi in charge went with an overly passive plan that saw both sides trading ships at a rate the Republic couldn't sustain. General Rancisis, if we continue trading ships with the enemy at this rate, we're going to lose the system. Tarkin growled at the Jedi. Why did High Command put that madman in charge anyway? Wilhuff had been pondering that question ever since Rancisis arrived. Why couldn't they send Piel? The man might have been annoying as hell, however Tarkin couldn't deny his competence. Give the order and I'll lead a counter-attack against their next assault. If we bloody them bad enough, we'll buy ourselves more time. Letting the enemy have the initiative and dictate the tempo of the engagement is suicide, Tarkin snapped. General, I have to agree with the Commodore. Admiral Cal finally saw sense and decided to support him. It was a week too long, however Wilhuff was going to take what he could. Thank you, Admiral. He nodded in gratitude. The Separatists can't keep these assaults for much longer. Rancisis dismissed the suggestion. We still have fleets pulling back to reinforce us. Fleets that are being chased by enemy forces that would at best make sure the overall situation doesn't change. Tarkin shot back. I will not send our men to die pointlessly, Rancisis hissed. We've got another convoy coming back. I suggest we continue this discussion later, Cal stated after an aide got his attention. Tarkin looked away from the hollow images of the other officers and turned his head towards the holotank. Zoom out, we've got more strays coming home. I want to know how many and where they're. Wilhuff ordered. Aye, sir. The image changed. 10 cruisers apparently got lucky. While they were obviously damaged, they arrived away from any nearby enemy forces that could immediately threaten them. If they were fast and lucky enough, they might even make it without being engaged. Which task force? Tarkin asked. Thanks to ECM from enemy units between his ship and the newcomers, the IFF couldn't be read. We're analyzing now, sir. The officer in charge of the sensors reported. Wilhuff frowned. They were out of position. It would take him longer to reach them than the newcomers would need to make another jump to the edge of the gravity well. A minute passed while the convoy headed towards Camino at maximum acceleration. Separatist units were moving to intercept them, but unless they could plot a hyperspace insertion coordinates in time, the survivors would make it. Another minute was almost up and the hyperdrives should be ready soon. Sir, we've got preliminary analysis. We've got ships from multiple task forces. The officer paused. That can't be right. What is it, Commander? Tarkin asked. At least one of those ships is reported lost. 2 more are from a battle group we lost contact with more than 2 weeks ago. Wilhuff's blood froze. Those weren't Republic ships. They were Separatist now. Give me a line to Cal and Rancisis now, Tarkin snapped. Long seconds passed. The ships came closer and closer, then a Separatist force jumped almost in their path, but not quite. The newcomers altered their vectors a bit to avoid collision and fire was exchanged. For a moment Tarkin thought he was mistaken, then shook his head. This was a masterful deception, nothing more. What is it? We're busy, Commodore, Rancisis hissed angrily. It's a trap. Those ships are under enemy control. Tarkin explained. That's why the enemy is engaging them. The Jedi sneered. Stop wasting my time, Commodore. Tarkin grit his teeth when Rancisis cut off the channel. He looked at the holotank just in time to see the convoy vanishing. Captain, I want the task force advancing towards the flagship. We're being had. Wilhuff ordered. Before he was finished, the cruisers appeared on the edge of the gravity well. They didn't alter their course but instead continued to accelerate. Separatist ships attempting such a stunt would have been blown to pieces. However, no one opened fire on those units. Then the enemy jumped the gun and sent the next assault wave. Well done. Tarkin nodded in grudging respect. He doubted that those cruisers would be stopped now. Not when a couple of hundred enemy ships threw themselves against the defenders as a distraction. Engage the enemy. Continue moving towards the flagship. Have the local reserve take our place. Tarkin ordered. A few seconds later he called sensor image of those cruisers. No one was shooting at them yet. Damned fools. Wilhuff grumbled. Finally someone over there figured that something was wrong. 2 Vinotas began maneuvering to avoid being hit. The pair of Golan platforms that were targeted to had nowhere to go and weren't shooting yet, damn it. 8 of the captured cruisers opened their hangars and began launching assault transports and vultures to screen them. They also opened fire and only now Rancisis and company deemed fit to return the favor. It was too little too late. The defending fleet couldn't leverage enough firepower at those cruisers to take them out in time. One slammed into Cal's flagship and soon both of them were expanding clouds of debris. Another clipped Rancisis' ship, yet didn't manage a mutual kill. Why the hell the decent man had to die while Rancisis likely survived? Tarkin wanted to scream in frustration. Then to his utter lack of surprise things got worse. The 2 Golan stations were hit by 3 Vinotas each and that was more than they could handle. Final defensive fire from nearby ships shot down some droid fighters and transports, though most of them passed through the shield and too damn many continued towards the surface under their own power. The remaining rogue cruisers breached the atmosphere and began barely controlled glide towards the oceans below after being mostly disabled by the shield. Unfortunately, they opened their hangars before that, and more transports that were shielded by their motherships launched and began their descent. As if all that wasn't a big enough disaster, the enemy sent 3 whole battleship divisions at the gap in the orbital defenses above Tipoca City. "Is Ransisis reachable?" Tarkin asked. "We can't raise the flag," the comm officer answered after a few tries. "At least something good came out of this. Give me a fleet-wide channel," Tarkin ordered. He took a deep breath and put his thoughts in order. "This is Commodore Wilhuff Tarkin. Admiral Cal's ships was just destroyed and General Ransisis' flag took crippling damage. The Jedi Master is currently out of contact. I'm assuming command of the fleet. Contingency Arubsh 3 is now in effect. All forces are to counterattack if practical. 1st to 3rd Reserve Squadrons, move in to plug the gap. I'm moving my battle group to assist." Wilhuff made a motion to cut the channel. Tarkin sighed in relief. Now all he had to do was to deal with the enemy and ensure that Ransisis wouldn't be retaking command of the Navy. "Call Master Shark T. I need to talk with her." If Ransisis was still alive, which was a given considering Tarkin's luck lately, he was going to ensure that the overgrown snake would be somewhere he could be actually useful, like down at the capital, keeping at bay the enemy troops he allowed to land. =RK= Assault Transport Omega 3. Camino. Captain Romilda Vance sat strapped in her seat and wondered how the criff she ended up in this criffing mess. The war was supposed to be over, lost. Every fight, every sacrifice made irrelevant when the Navy collapsed after a week of heavy fighting all across the galaxy, leaving the Sith Empire victorious. As if that wasn't enough, the small fleet bringing Havoc Squad home, possibly one of the last battle groups that the Republic still had, suffered a hyperspace accident that somehow stranded them in a strange and terrible future. Romilda grimaced. The news that everything they knew had been gone for thousands of years was too much after the defeat. It broke too many of the people who had survived everything the Sith could throw at them. Only figuring out that the Republic had preserved and controlled the galaxy stopped the wave of suicides and people who had simply given up and refused to live. For a few days that news had injected life into the Remnant, as they began to call themselves. That lasted just as long as it took to figure out that this so-called Republic wasn't anything like they expected. Rampant corruption, inefficient Senate that was practically useless. The command staff had gathered to decide what to do. There were a lot of angry people at that meeting. The Remnant needed a cause, a reason to keep going, and Master Perian gave them precisely that. A goal. A cause to fight for. Even now, a few years later, Romilda had no idea how the discussion had turned from talks of reforming the new Republic into finding a way to tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up. It wasn't something that happened suddenly. As the Remnant learned more about the Republic and talked with people on a dozen of worlds in the Outer Rim, they began seeing some uncomfortable things. Then they heard about Count Dooku, a former Jedi leading a secessionist movement after being disgusted with the Republic. Feelers were sent, agents met him to hear his side. The tiding they brought was the final coffin. The Republic had been under the control of the Sith for years now. Dooku even presented some kind of proof, though Vance didn't see it herself. Once that became known across the Remnant, all of them were outraged. Felt the betrayal. After all they had suffered through, after all they had sacrificed and lost, finding a Republic controlled by the Sith was too much. The Remnant had their cause. They had an enemy. It was that simple. The only snag was when Master Perian found out that Dooku himself was a Sith too. That's when the Remnant almost broke beyond repairing. It was only the Jedi Master's charisma that got them through the last shattering blow. Romilda smiled at the thought. If it wasn't for Perian being able to pull them through and give them a reason to go on, Vance was sure that even she would have bitten the blaster sooner than later. When the Jedi Master spoke, everyone could hear the conviction in his voice. Everyone could see his point. The new Republic was a corrupt mess that needed to be torn down. The Sith wasn't much better with a Sith in charge. Things became clear. They weren't sent into the future as a joke by a merciless universe. They were here to save the galaxy from the Sith and the corrupted monster that usurped their Republic. It all made sense. They got a noble reason to go on. To fight, to live. Perian was right too. The Remnant actions caused the Confederacy to overthrow the Sith leading them, making an alliance to save the Republic's citizens from Dooku's master and that monster Veil possible. That's why Romilda was here. in the back of an assault transport leading a company of remnant special forces and a pair of Jedi attached to her command. They were going to cripple the New Republic's clone production and retrieve the Gars gene templates. A victory on Kamino would be the first step in the open towards restoring the real Republic. Romilda smiled and her eyes shone with a purpose. It was high time to show those cloned fakes what proper Republic soldiers were like. Operation Southern Star =RK Part 5 Gar Command Center, Tipoca City, Kamino. Shark T rubbed her forehead and groaned. She wondered what the Council thought when they arranged Rancisis to be put in charge of the naval units in the system, if they thought anything at all. Commodore Tarkin, your request is approved. You have command of the fleet. When Master Rancisis is recovered, please send him down here. We need to have a chat, the younger Jedi Master said. Thank you, Ma'am. T could feel Tarkin's relief. Can you spare some fighters? Too many of the enemy transports are going to reach Tipoca. We lack enough air assets and AA to stop the bulk of their forces before landing, the Jedi Master asked. I'll see what I can do, General. Our torrent wings took a serious beating. Tarkin looked away. Send in the rest of the reserve now. Concentrate on the leading battleships, the Commodore ordered. General, I'm afraid you might have even more separatists to deal with shortly. They're throwing everything they've got in the breach and hitting us all across the line. I'm not sure I have the assets to prevent the enemy from gaining and holding a foothold in orbit. May the Force be with you, Commodore Tarkin. Do your best, that's all I can ask for. Good luck, General. Tarkin out. Rex, the 501st is with me. We'll be the operational reserve, T said. The Jedi waved a hand and the projection hovering in the middle of the room shifted to show a bird's-eye view of Tipoca. There were a lot of red symbols coming down and too few blue ones rising to meet them. Give me camera feeds, the Jedi Master ordered. One of the clones manning the command center did so and windows opened in front of the general showing what was happening outside. Missiles, both from the Torrent squadrons and AA emplacements, rose to challenge the advancing enemy. The invaders responded in kind with all the leading vultures opening their wings and revealing the ordnance hidden there. The night sky was lit up by scores of explosions and then torn asunder as laser cannons opened up. A few hundred vultures died screening the assault transport. The remaining droid fighters went after the surviving torrents with a small number going in ballistic towards the city. The second group kept firing everything until they were either shot down or rammed into AA emplacements. Even the CP shook a bit after a vulture slammed nearby. Next came the transports preceded by gunships which rained hellfire upon the city. Shark T frowned when she felt a shift in the force. She raised a hand and without thinking used her power to manipulate the controls. One of the windows shifted angles and showed a separatist assault transport. From this side it was obvious that its rear ramp was open. The camera caught it just in time to see two figures jumping out. The Jedi Master leaned forward and stared intently at that pair. The Force whispered to her. They were important. The camera followed them as they fell faster than mere gravity could account for. Suddenly they abruptly slowed down before slamming into a platform with an AA emplacement and a squad of clones providing security. The troopers were thrown away like leaves on the wind and the weapon crumbled as if hit by a giant hammer. The unknowns stood up from their landing and pulled out lightsabers which they promptly ignited. Their blades were a vibrant shade of blue. T grit her teeth. Was this the Order's punishment for their hubris? The price they had to pay for tactically supporting a Sith Lord for months? Those people were old Republic Jedi. They should have been the Order's natural allies. Instead, members of the Council chose to ally with Vale of all people. This is going to be unpleasant, Rex stated after seeing the old Republic Jedi joining the fray. Tactical teams led by Jedi taking out strategic objectives leading to the fall of whole planets, T hissed. That's what Vale told her about the Jedi of old. Damn that man and his manipulations. It was because of them and the incompetence of the Council that she was forced to go out and fight fellow Jedi. Lucky us, Rex muttered. =RK=. Out to landing platforms. Tipoca City, Kamino. Making an aerial insertion was still a rush even after hundreds of jumps. The only thing Romilda regretted was that she couldn't actually feel the air rushing around her thanks to the power armor encasing her. However, the capabilities of her suit more than made up for that minor inconvenience. Her HUD updated with information from the IFF beacons of her people. More than two-thirds of the company survived to make the jump and all were already in the air. Another update in the sensor suite of the armor began noting targets spread all across the landing platforms that were her first target. The Jedi who jumped first were already landing and causing havoc. Now it was time for her unit to live up to its name. Vance designated targets for her shoulder-mounted missile pod and activated the repulsor unit to counteract the recoil before firing. 6 micro-missiles shot from their sheath, then the pod detached and flew behind her. The anti-grav unit whined as it fought to slow Romilda's descent, giving her just enough time to see the platforms being engulfed in fire. There were hundreds of missiles shot from her company alone. By the time she landed, the resistance in the immediate area was confused and had lost most of its heavy weapons. Up and at them! The captain shouted and charged over the bridge leading towards the next platform. A pair of troopers who landed nearby joined her. One was a heavy weapons specialist who moved slower but compensated by suppressing the next platform with his assault cannon. The other was a marksman packing an anti-material rifle. The only one who had a prayer of slowing them down was a clone wearing one of their new heavy armors which were practically combat exoskeletons. The man had a laser cannon of his own and shot at Romilda, who dodged by triggering her repulsor unit once she saw him aiming at her. One shot was all he could do before being staggered by a sniper round that shattered his shields and dented his armor. Vance finished him off with a burst from her own weapon meant to deal with heavy infantry. The clone's armor was simply insufficient to deal with that much firepower. His chest plate caved in and the man was instantly cooked. Securing the next platform was as simple as disposing of a couple of wounded clones before making sure that the AA emplacement there would not fire again. After that, Romilda charged over the next bridge. The sheer shock of the explosive entry combined with almost unrestricted air support and 20 Jedi was more than enough to see the outer platforms fall in a short order. The enemy rallied up and put a stiffer resistance only when they reached the city itself, where the clones blew up the bridges leading to the outer platforms. That was a mere inconvenience for the Old Republic Special Forces and their Jedi allies. However, most of the droids were going to have trouble crossing until an engineering section could rig new bridges if someone figured a way to improvise. Well, there were always the still intact transports hanging back until the AA in the area was properly dealt with. This will be interesting. Romilda smiled when he reached the enemy positions. The clones were dug in and had the higher ground. They were positioned on balconies along the buildings across the blown-up bridges leading towards the landing platforms. They had heavy weapons too, laser cannons, missile and rocket launchers, and at least a third of them had the new weapons and armor being fielded by the New Republic. This was the kid of problems Havoc, especially when backed up by Jedi, was meant to solve. RK Captain, do you need a hand? Newly promoted Jedi Knight Dini Strum asked after finally making her way to the front line. We can use any assistance you can provide, Master Jedi. The power-armored woman answered. How good is your telekinesis? Pretty good. Why? Dini answered. We can use some makeshift cover and a way across. Captain Vance explained and then waved at the platforms behind them. Deploy smoke grenades, my team and I will do the trick. Dini nodded. Seconds later, the whole area was covered by multispectral smoke clouds. You heard the captain, people. Follow my lead. The Jedi Knight ordered. She closed her eyes and concentrated. Her mind expanded, touched the Jedi around her and their wills merged. It wasn't a technique that could be used for long or when under direct fire, thus the smoke, however, for as long as it lasted. One of the nearby landing pads, which was free from friendly forces, began shacking when 5 Jedi concentrated their wills upon it. It was torn away from its supporting pillar with a deafening screech of tortured metal, then slowly flew above the heads of the Old Republic soldiers. It gained speed until it tore through the air with enough force to embed itself in the building on the other side of the chasm. Dini faltered from the spent energy, though she smiled at a job well done. Only a couple of meter-long gap was left between the closest platform and the one now sticking from under the enemy position. Short enough for the commando droids to jump through from a running start and trivial for Jedi and power-armored troopers to cross. Strum carefully extracted herself from the Meldon side in relief when she felt the rest of her unit were all right if a bit tired. That's more than good enough, Master Jedi. Go, go, go. The captain ordered and she led the charge. Dini grinned at the praise and sprinted after the older woman. Part 6. CIC, Republic Cruiser Daring. high orbit over Camino. Daring shook as she glided over the edge of Camino's shield. She and her consorts flew so close to the energy barrier that the electromagnetic field produced by it compromised their stability. Their deflectors were at maximum power, slowly draining due to the interference. However, it was all worth it to pull of a tiny bit more speed from the Venators. Tarkin's battle group was still a minute out of range from the separatist battleships exploiting the hole torn into Camino's defenses. 20 Lucree hulks were advancing at the gap which the remaining Golan stations couldn't properly interdict. Over 100 escorts were screening the battleships, taking hits, going into ramming runs and putting a deadly umbrella barrier in place. The reserve squadrons, built from a single Venator with light cruiser and frigate escort, were entering the fray in a desperate attempt to plug the hole. Tarkin was racing there too, however he was sensing that it might already be too late. Munificence shattered under the crossfire of multiple cruisers, a swarm of vultures threw itself into the gap. A Venator was mission killed when 20 frigates concentrated their forward weapons on it. Tarkin tore away his gaze from that engagement and looked at the bigger picture. The rest of the assault was more cautious, obviously meant to pin down the bulk of the Republic fleet while the Separatists could exploit the opening. 2 days ago it wouldn't have worked. Then Tarkin could have sent in reserves that were wasted by Rancisis. Even yesterday morning he would have something more to work with. Damn you, Tarkin hissed. He clutched his fist so hard that he could no longer properly feel his fingers. He looked back at the gap in time to see the munificent formation opening and spreading out to clear the battleship firing lanes. Half of those frigates were still intact when they should have been gutted. The reserve finally got into position, caught 7 of the munificents into crossfire and promptly shattered them. The 3 battle groups were in place, however the same was true for the battleships. All units above Tiboka City with the exception of the reserve force are to attack immediately. Push out the enemy and move in to englobe the separatist battleships, then concentrate fire on them. No less than 10 cruisers per Lucree Huke. Tarkin ordered. Captain, bring the battle group 15 degrees up, then straighten our course. Primary targets are the frigates and light destroyers. Once we're clear, coordinate fire on the closest battleship. Whole Venator divisions and their escorts surged forward. That bold move caught the enemy by surprise after a week-long passive defense. The separatist escorts failed to react fast enough to the changed situation, and a third of them were caught out of position and wiped out before the rest could consolidate and form a proper formation. Whoever was in charge of the battleships reacted promptly. He kept half of them going towards the planet, while the rest changed vectors as fast as they could and moved to attack the Republic forces attempting to trap them. At last Tarkin's cruisers were in range and they opened fire at the enemy escorts. Munificence and recusants began dying faster. Their broadsides lacked enough punch to even slow down the armored fist falling upon their formation. A minute later, Tarkin's battle group was through, leaving a thrice their number of gutted escorts in their wake. That was a long time for the reserve battle groups. Even combined, they had the firepower to barely take out a single battleship. The 10 coming at them, the only way to stop them was by taking a page from the Separatists' playbook and attempt to ramming run. They couldn't run, couldn't hide, and standing meant dying a bit slower. The reserves flew straight at the enemy, maneuvering so their formations came at the Separatists one after another and thus using the ships in front as shield. Whoever thought of that needed a medal. Promotion 2 if they were lucky to survive. The Lucree hulks weren't maneuverable enough to evade and were already in Camino's gravity well, so escaping was out of the question. Their answer was simple: reverse thrust to slow down the approach and fire everything. The reserves ran straight into what looked like a wall made of red turbo laser fire. The leading battle group simply disintegrated and it was soon followed by the second. The third plowed through the debris of their comrades, some of the lighter ships going out of control thanks to the collisions. The light escorts died first, simply torn to pieces from the ceaseless barrages. The light cruisers fared a bit better, though they too shattered under concentrated fire. That left a single Venator approaching the leading Lucree Huke. The cruiser's shields were on fire and soon popped up like a soap bubble touching open flame. Turbolaser fire racked the Venator, yet it was too late. It came in firing all the way and all 3 battle groups were unleashing all their firepower upon that single Lucree Huke, forcing it to keep its deflectors up and particle shielding at minimum power. The Venator flew through the gap in the outer hull and struck the battleship in the center of the sphere containing its vital systems. Even the Lucree Huke's heavy armor couldn't survive such an impact. It caved and the cruiser plunged deep into the battleship's guts. The sheer momentum of the impact pushed the larger craft up and backwards before its reactor went critical and both ships went up in a blinding explosion. That sacrifice wasn't in vain. Tarkin smiled coldly when he managed to tear his gaze away from the last stand. His plan worked. The counterattack was successful and multiple battle groups were in position to surround the enemy battleships. The only downside was that the 9 Closet to Camino were going to unload all the droids on board and send them down before he could do anything about them. Tarkin sighed. That was less than ideal, yet the best he could do. Now he had to maul those Luke Ryuk before the enemy could muster a rescue force and get them out of the improvised trap. Angle us down 5 degrees, cut engines and all non-essential power and transfer that energy to forward weapons and shields. Tarkin ordered. =RK=. Outer landing platforms. Tipoca City. Camino. Dini used the Force to vault over the parapet at the balcony where the New Republic soldiers had taken position. When she landed, the young Jedi Knight was surrounded by both a Force barrier and a shield emitted by her custom light power armor meant for exclusive Jedi use. Those defenses bought her the necessary few moments to gain her bearing and concentration so she could sweep the whole area off enemy soldiers by sending powerful telekinetic shock waves to her sides. Most clones were thrown clearly off the balcony, with a few unlucky souls bouncing between the railing and the walls before finally crashing for the last time. Moments later, more remnant Jedi troopers came up and began fanning in all directions. Clones away from the affected area attempted to bottle them up only to face strike teams led by veteran Jedi who could withstand the firepower leveled their way and then some. The troopers protected by the Knights wasted no time in shooting up any resistance and the advance continued without slowing down. Without proper anti-Sith or well Jedi tactics, all the clones had on their side were numbers and firepower. Given the battlefield they fought, only the latter mattered in the short term, and the New Republic forces were soon figuring out that properly supported Jedi Knights were a nightmare to deal with. Some of them even lived long enough to tell the tale. Dini herself was on point, followed by Captain Vance's command squad and half a platoon of the expanded Havoc squad, which was now a company-sized formation. The Jedi Knight soon fell in a pattern she was familiar with from the war against the Sith: deflect the incoming blaster bolts or tank them with a force-based barrier, sent back to sender any missiles, rockets and grenades coming her way, and either reflect heavy laser shots, take out those weapons before they could fire at you, or simply don't be where they aimed when they finally took a pot shot at you. She would have been in some amount of danger in a more open battlefield, however that simply wasn't the case in Tipoca City. The firing lines were restricted and usually funneled the enemy into coming from a single direction. Havoc dealt with anyone audacious enough to attempt a flanking maneuver, which left Dini with a reasonably simple job: to act as a mobile cover for the troopers behind her. That was something her Guardian training covered extensively as a Padawan, and she had some experience against people familiar with the tactic and knowing how to counter it. She knew the clones were going to learn sooner rather than later. It was inevitable. It was going to make no difference for this fight. Dini turned the corner to face another strong point at the end of rig-to-blow hanging bridge. The clones stationed there opened fire with everything they got: blaster, 2 heavy repeaters as well as a pair of grenade launchers. Morris, do your thing. Dini ordered the best telekinetic in her team. I'm on it, the human youth exclaimed. Dini concentrated on the task at hand. Her lightsaber became a blur as she drew more force energy into her body in order to enhance her reflexes. The world around her slowed down, allowing her to meet every single shot coming her way, though the firepower was enough that she couldn't spare the effort to properly reflect it back. Meanwhile the grenades froze over the bridge, then suddenly flew back even faster, and before the clones could react their position disappeared behind multiple explosions. A heartbeat later, all the explosives attached to the bridge were rudely torn from it and hurled away before someone had the presence of mind to detonate them. At least they made for nice fireworks. The enemy should have set them up to blow at the first sign of tampering. Doing so would have one way or another slowed down the advance. Dini waved for one of the other Jedi to take point until she could take a breather. She waited for the first couple of squads to cross the bridge and followed suit in the middle of the formation. Soon enough Dini would recover and take point again. After Tython she was eager to make those serving Vale pay for what he did to her master. =RK=. Gar Command Center. Tipoca City. Camino. We need to slow down their advance, Rex said. Set up crossfires, call in air support and all indirect fire assets. That might work. He thought aloud. He wondered if that's how the Separatists felt when they had to deal with a GAR unit led by a Jedi, then dismissed the idea. What he was seeing over the cameras was worse. Those enemy commandos were acting as if they had been working with the Jedi for years, perhaps decades. So far nothing the forward-deployed GAR elements did besides blowing up bridges and wrecking as much as possible of the buildings to deny easy access seemed to slow them down. "We're fresh out of air support, boss," Fives pointed out. "Here." Shark T spoke after zooming in the map of the city floating in the middle of the chamber. "I feel this is the most dangerous enemy unit. We need to stop them now." "Plan?" Rex asked. "Let them enter that building. It's the fastest route towards the cloning facilities and they're making a beeline for them. We'll be ambushing them inside. I'll keep their Jedi." Shark T spat the word as if it was a curse, "on me. You'll hit the commandos as hard as you can and try taking their Force adepts from behind. Attack from multiple angles and directions at the same time. Gear up on what sonic weaponry we have in the armory before we leave." "That's it?" Boomer chuckled. "I like it. It's simple so it's harder to get criffed up. There's a whole droid army coming for us. Unless we stop those people from gaining a bigger foothold in the city, Tipoca will be lost soon and that's unacceptable." Shark T snapped. "Armory, now." Conflagration. =RK=. Part 1. General Plo Koon's quarters. Republic cruiser Gallant. Corellia. A shrill keening noise tore Master Koon away from his meditation. He bolted up from the floor where he sat and went for his comm. "This is General Koon, report." The Jedi wheezed through his breath mask. The captain's face, that of an ordinary-looking clone, appeared in front of Koon's face. "Our long-range scanners detected massive disturbance 6 light-years away. The Separatists are coming. There's too much interference and sensor ghosts to be sure of total numbers, however there's a lot of them," the clone reported. "Rough estimates are 2 to 3 times our worst-case scenario." "I see," the Jedi said. "I trust you've called the fleets to battle stations?" Koon asked, though the still roaring alarm was a dead giveaway. "Yes, sir. I'm coming to the flag bridge. Get me a conference call between Kenobi, Coburn, and Yularen," the Jedi ordered before switching off the comm and marching towards the ship's nerve center. On his way there, Koon mussed that it was a good thing High Command had criffed up their deployment orders and hadn't sent Yularen to reinforce the Outer Rim as he was supposed to do. The man had been surprised when he had been called for a status report and asked about the situation on Naboo when he was in fact here at Corellia overseeing the final repairs of the forces that fought at Geonosis. That administrative fiasco meant that Kenobi could remain back on Coruscant doing his job, running the whole war, while Yularen was free to command one of the reserve fleets in the Corps. That was vital, considering that Welf was one of the few flag officers to actually command forces of the scale being deployed at Kuwait, Corellia and in the reserves. Yularen's expertise and experience had been invaluable in setting up the training for Koon's fleet. Now it only remained to be seen how well all that effort could be put in practice. =RK=. Plo Koon entered the flag bridge and nodded in approval when he found it a hive of activity. His staff were busy updating the holotank with the status of the defense fleets. One after another they were lighting up in green denouncing full combat readiness. The Jedi got in just in time, because the images of the people he needed to talk with appeared one after another next to the main tactical plot after he entered the compartment. "You've got a situation, Plo?" Obi-Wan asked. "Yes. It has begun. Our intelligence appears to be wrong," the Jedi Master confirmed. Kenobi looked away from the comm unit and nodded. "I see. I'll talk with the relevant people. They obviously dropped the ball in a bad way. Any sign of activity on your end, Coburn?" "It's just a matter of time. As you know, last night the Separatists secured Bulmora after Ningo forced our remaining forces there to retreat. He's close enough to make it in one direct jump if he has done his homework properly." "Such a jump is quite risky," Yularen noted. "Yes. It can also bring a whole fleet on my doorstep with little to no warning," Coburn grumbled. "Thoughts? Is the main blow coming at Corellia?" Obi-Wan asked. "If it isn't, I hate to think what they have in store for Coburn," Koon pointed out. "It's good thing we were overly paranoid in reinforcing you both," Kenobi muttered. We've got enough forces in place to crush what we expected to hit us. Coburn frowned. When combined with the system defense navies anyway. It wasn't a secret that the old man was pissed off that the Kuwait's own navy outgunned his sector fleet after recalling home all their mandators and smaller battle cruisers. Things were not so lopsided at Karelia with only 5 of their 6 Karelian cruisers in system. They were still a formidable force able to give Kuhn's own command a run for its money. When combined with the rest of Karelia's system defense navy, those ships made for a big and powerful force on their own. Plo Koon was going to need every one of them plus some heavy reinforcements. Kenobi, we've got a situation. Valentra's characteristic voice snapped off screen. What? If Obi-Wan was annoyed, it didn't show in his voice. The former Jedi looked away when suddenly his image twisted and distorted. Kenobi was saying something, however his voice came in as a garbled mess. The familiar whine produced by jamming came over the comm and Obi-Wan's image was gone. Comms, I want a status report. Raise GAR HQ on Coruscant now. Kuhn ordered. The mere fact that both Coburn and Yularen were still present in a holographic form meant that the problem wasn't on Plo's end. We're trying. Sir, we can't raise HQ. I'm attempting to call. The Criff? General, I can't raise anyone at Coruscant. The comm officer exclaimed. The Separatists couldn't have bypassed us, Coburn exclaimed. We've got listening posts and battle groups stationed all over the core. My people can't raise Coruscant either. I have them trying to do so with the nearby systems. They'll send a scout to find out the Criff is happening at the capital, Yularen declared after speaking with someone on his side. Gentlemen, we've got a problem. Yularen's people might very well be needed back on Coruscant in case I'm mistaken. Coburn grunted. The 3 of them looked at each other. I'll be able to hold Karelia without reinforcements. However, in that case most of the industry away from the planet could be written off. That's a significant chunk of our new construction. This might be a separatist trick to paralyze our response. Yularen suggested. Attempt to divert my forces so they can hit you without interference. True. Plo Koon nodded. I suggest you wait until a scout can reach Coruscant and confirm what's happening over there. I'll keep the channel open and inform you of what's really hitting Karelia. I'll be doing the same when our uninvited guests arrive here too. Coburn nodded. Sir, update on the enemy forces. They're entering hyperspace. Plo Koon looked at the holotank. The fleets were ready. All but a handful of the battle stations were good to go and all fighter and bomber wings were manned and needed just an order to launch. This is General Plo Koon to all Republic and Karelian forces in system. I'm assuming direct tactical command of the fleets. The enemy comes daring to challenge the Republic, democracy itself. Our very freedom. The Jedi Master spoke with conviction. Today we draw a line and say no more. Here we stand. Here we fight. Here we win. For the Republic. As if answering his challenge, a new alarm sounded. The holotank began updating as the enemy began arriving in the system. And updating. That's a lot of red. A staff lieutenant muttered. I should have kept my mouth shut. Plo Koon groaned. The people in intelligence had criffed up so much the Jedi Master had no words. Admiral Yularen, I'll need all the reinforcements you can get to me yesterday if I'm to keep any of the industry intact. Koon turned to look at the image of the younger man. Welf nodded. There was no doubt he was looking at the raw data being streamed to his ship. I'll get the ball rolling. We'll be there in a few hours. Admiral Coburn, I'm putting the secondary echelon reserves at your disposal. Call them if you need them, Yularen sighed. Let's just hope Coruscant isn't under attack too. Plo Koon turned his attention to the task at hand. He needed to buy time. All Arubish elements, you're a go. Go in, maul them and pull back to your zones. Take as many of the escorts as possible. Koon out. The Jedi Master ordered. The 5 elongated triangles designating a Karelian cruiser each began moving along with their escorting broods. Letting the enemy dictate the terms of the engagement was going to be suicide given their apparent numbers. The Separatists still got ships arriving in system and they had already brought thousands of them. A very un-Jedi-like expression crossed Koon's face. This was a target-rich environment. Precisely the type of battlefield the Karelian cruisers were meant to exploit. Each of them was worth roughly 1,000 recusant light destroyers or even more munificence, and the Jedi Master just unleashed them all upon the enemy. RK equals. Part 2. Garage. Borealis. Coruscant. Sir, I'll really appreciate if one of these days you begin keeping a lower profile. Agent Bale Kyle grumbled. He was the man unlucky enough to be in charge of Director Ruler's security detail, something that was hard on the nerves. Bale was a middle-aged human whose hair was already turning silver thanks to all the stress he had to deal with on a daily basis. His boss's various excursions all across Coruscant weren't helping. Nonsense. We've finally got the place more or less secured. Besides, who's going to be aiming at me when there are so many more juicy targets on Coruscant? Marek chuckled and held the air-car door open for his wife, who simply shook her head at their antics and got inside after giving Kyle an apologetic look. Every single seppi in the region? Bale sighed. We got most of the bastards. The director smiled. Most is most certainly not all, boss. The agent pointed out. Fine, rain on my parade. What's the next stop? Ula asked. Home. You might actually get a few hours of sleep before the next crisis this time. That would be the day. The director smiled and got into the air car. Bale looked around, nodded to the rest of the security detail and went into one of the other cars of the small convoy. So far so good. Prism, Pillar Actual, we're leaving. Kyle called the central. Anything of note? Over. Pillar Actual, Prism. Negative. Everything looks fine. No new alerts and nothing out of the ordinary on the scanners. Have a nice trip, over. We're a go, folks. Let's try not to end the day by criffing up, alright? Kyle called the rest of the security detail, earning himself a few tired chuckles. The convoy headed towards the exit when a bright flash of light blinded Bale. The following thunderclap was little more than an afterthought because he was too busy being tossed around when his car was picked up and sent skidding across the floor by a shock wave. When Kyle was coherent again, the first thing he noticed was sharp pain in his side, arm and back. Only then he began remembering that something went terribly wrong. Prism, Pillar Actual, 3 was an explosion. Bale wheezed in his comm. We need assistance. The agent found that talking and breathing was getting harder. Kyle looked around and even that little motion sent red-hot pain running up his back. A distant part of his mind concluded that hurting was good, it meant he wasn't paralyzed. Bale saw that his car was more or less upright, though the people inside were at least as bad hurt as he was. He appeared to be the only one conscious at the time. Kyle carefully turned his head and looked around. There was a smoking pile of debris in the middle of the garage. If he didn't know better, he would have thought they were all that was left from the director's car. Oh, wait. Kyle blinked and swore quietly. That was Ula's car. RK equals. Jedi Master Piel's quarters. Jedi Temple. Coruscant. Why did you call us all here? Teen whispered. We just got a data file from our friends. You need to see it now. The small Jedi grumbled. He waved his co-conspirators to get inside and close the door, before plugging a data chip in a hollow projector built into his dining table. Piel proceeded to go fast-forward the piece of separatist propaganda until the announcement that Dooku had been handed to the Jedi. We've got hours at best before this become public knowledge here on Coruscant. Less before the Chancellor sees this and begins wondering what his apprentice has been telling us. Do I need to go on? Piel spat. We're out of time. Kota nodded. I'll go pick up our friend. Who is coming with us to talk with the Chancellor about this recording. This is information he simply needs to see. Ram smiled thinly. I agree. Master Dralik said. I'll get everything moving here. How long do you need before we can go loud? I'll talk with Yoda. He'll be seeing our other problem student. Then I'm off to our waylaid friend. Teen smiled sadly. It's decided then? Master Yaddle sighed. All right. Shin, I'll collect your Padawan and we'll go check up on the younglings. They can use a walk to stretch their legs. I'll go talk with the Chancellor too then. Piel looked around. Any second thoughts? We're already too deep for those. Kota snorted. We're already committed and our hands are dirty. The only thing left is to see if we can neutralize the Sith or not. May the Force be with us all. Teen gave the assembled Jedi a deep bow and left the room, with Piel and Kota following behind. I certainly hope so. Otherwise all this is going to be for nothing. Yaddle muttered. We'll make sure that the order doesn't end today. That's all we can do. Dralik told her. The rest is up to the Force. I trust the Force not to cruff up. I can't necessarily say the same for the Jedi who let things get so bad without noticing. Yaddle chuckled sadly. That includes us too, you know. Shin quipped. Most certainly. We aren't blameless. We should have acted when Yoda told us about the Sith all those months ago. We were blind, complacent, and now it's time to pay the price. The tiny woman frowned. I regret that we won't be the only one affected by the fallout. No matter what, things are going to get worse before they can get better. Come on, we have some youngsters to pick up. Hey equals. Sib safe house. Coruscant. Can you feel it, Mace? Dooku asked. The Count was sitting next to his one-time friend, who was his jailer nowadays, and sharing a cup of tea with the man. Changes in the air. I can. Windu nodded. The Force is trembling in anticipation. The former Jedi Master put down his cup. It's going to be today. Soon. Have you decided what to do with me? Dooku asked. He didn't appear to care one way or another. We might still go with Yvonne's plan. That idea has potential. Unless Sidious decides to simply play along as the tired old man. Dooku frowned. He has that routine down to perfection. We'll do what we have to. Mace paused and looked at the front door. They weren't expecting visitors today, however he could sense two familiar Force signatures ready to enter. It's time, Windu said and stood up. The door opened to reveal Koto and Piel, who looked suitably grim. We're out of time. Palpatine will know very soon that we have him. The short Jedi pointed at Dooku. Asked, the game is up indeed. The Count smiled. What is going to be? You're coming with us, Dooku. The Chancellor will want to know if we have you. Windu smiled. We're going to give him what he wants. Mace turned towards the other Jedi. Have you called our allies? They're moving as we speak. The timing might have been better, however we have most pieces in place. Kota noted. My people are in position, the same goes for Sylvaris. Let's go then. Time is running out. I can feel it. Windu told them. RK equals. Hangars. Cis battleship warrior spirit. High orbit over Camino. It's done. The enemy air force is suppressed. We've got a secure beachhead at the capital. You're clear to deploy, General. Admiral Kirst announced. Lockdard beamed at the news. Splendid. I've got my new weapons ready to deploy and all those grim folks just waiting to exploit my success. The Nemoidian waved at the power-armored men getting into assault transports all around the hangar. Just try not to have friendly fire accidents. Our new allies won't appreciate it and they will be in position to do something about it. Kirst glared at the general. Oh, PSHH. There's nothing to worry about. I've tested my weapon against their nice armor. Derd frowned. It keeps it all out. Then he beamed again. However, the Republic's suits aren't as good. Go down there, secure the capital and get what we need so I can remove all the cloning facilities from orbit. I need the location of the shield generator complex, then I need our new friends to take it out. Meanwhile, you're to secure those samples for the Techno Union and get them up to the fleet. Don't fail us, General. Hey. No worries, I say. Everything is going to be just fine. Locke waved at the Admiral, who glared back. Get your forces planet side now, Kirst snapped. RK equals. Outskirts. Tipoca City. Camino. Using Tipoca's cameras, Rex was able to track their target's progress and deploy his men for what he hoped was a good ambush. He waited the remnant or whatever they called to enter the large building which was the most direct way towards the center of the city and ordered the 501st to begin converging on their positions. Meanwhile, he kept tracking the enemy to ensure there wouldn't be any unpleasant surprises. After seeing the remnant in action, Rex dismissed any notions in bringing heavy troopers. The better armor and shields simply weren't enough to stand up to the firepower brought by the enemy. Instead he opted for medium and light armor, thus relying on mobility and stealth. Still, he had his brothers grab the heaviest weapons they could. The firepower was going to be vital. They're getting near. Shark T whispered. My people are in position. 30 seconds and all squads will be ready to strike, Rex said after consulting the camera feeds. The enemy was moving in a long column with Jedi leading the way and taking up the rear. There was none of those in the middle of their formation at this time, which was going to be a boon, or so Rex hoped. He looked at the Jedi Master, who simply nodded. Rex sent 2 clicks over the comm. that was the signal. 20 seconds and the 501st was going to charge the enemy from the various side passages honeycombing the building. Shark T used the remaining time to stealthily move towards the corner end of the corridor where the enemy was coming from. She drew her lightsaber wave to the clones behind her to follow. Time was up. Ambush, someone shouted mere moments before the 501st struck. Rex didn't need the cameras to know that the enemy was scattering and covering all the approaches. He cursed and sprinted after Shark T, who activated her lightsaber and vanished behind the corner.